book I've chosen to read from today is a collection of short stories by Kurt Vonnegut. It's called Welcome to the Monkey House, and I will be reading the story by the same name. Vonnegut is one of the authors who I started reading as a teenager, and his work really fundamentally altered the way I saw the world. So it's still important to me. Books that I really love, I go back and read again, and I don't know how many times I've read this story. I think it speaks to the human condition as well as to being a fairly interesting and entertaining piece of fiction, but I think that's what good fiction does. So, welcome to the Monkey House. I'm going to read the last couple of pages of this story. Excuse me. He didn't hurt her. He deflowered her with a clinical skill she found ghastly. When it was all over, he didn't seem cocky or proud. On the contrary, he was terribly depressed, and he said to Nancy, "Believe me, if there'd been any other way." Her reply to this was a face like stone and silent tears of humiliation. His helpers let down a folding bunk from the wall. It was scarcely wider than a bookshelf and hung on chains. Nancy allowed herself to be put to bed in it, and she was left alone with Billy the poet again. Big as she was, like a double base wedged on that narrow shelf, she felt like a pitiful little thing. A scratchy war surplus blanket had been tucked in around her. It was her own idea to pull up a corner of the blanket to hide her face. Nancy sensed from the sounds what Billy was doing, which wasn't much. He was sitting at the table, sighing occasionally, sniffing occasionally, turning the pages of a book. He lit a cigar, and the stink of it seeped under the blanket. Billy inhaled the cigar, then coughed and coughed and coughed. When the coughing died down, Nancy said loathingly through the blanket, "You're so strong, so masterful, so healthy. It must be wonderful to be so manly." Billy only sighed at this. "I'm not a very typical nothing-head," she said. "I hated it, hated everything about it." Billy sniffed, turned a page. "I suppose all the other women just loved it, couldn't get enough of it." "Nope." She uncovered her face. "What do you mean, nope?" "They've all been like you." This was enough to make Nancy sit up and stare at him. "The women who helped you tonight? What about them? You've done to them what you've done to me?" He didn't look up from his book. "That's right." "Then why don't they kill you instead of helping you?" "Because they understand." And then he added mildly, "They're grateful." Nancy got out of bed, came to the table, gripped the edge of the table, leaned close to him, and she said to him tautly, "I am not grateful." "You will be." "And what could possibly bring about that miracle?" "Time," said Billy. Billy closed his book, stood up. Nancy was confused by his magnetism. Somehow he was very much in charge again. "What you've been through, Nancy," he said, "is a typical wedding night for a straight-laced girl of 100 years ago, when everybody was a nothing-head. The groom did without helpers because his bride wasn't customarily ready to kill him. Otherwise, the spirit of the occasion was much the same. These are the pajamas that my great-great-grandfather wore on his wedding night in Niagara Falls. According to his diary, his bride cried all that night and threw up twice. But with the passage of time, she became a sexual enthusiast." It was Nancy's turn to reply by not replying. She understood the tale. It frightened her to understand so easily that from gruesome beginnings, sexual enthusiasm could grow and grow. "You're a very typical nothing-head," said Billy. "If you dare to think about it now, you'll realize that you're angry because I'm such a bad lover, and such a funny-looking shrimp besides. And what you can't help dreaming about from now on is a really suitable mate for a Juno like yourself. You'll find him, too, tall and strong and gentle. The nothing head movement is growing by leaps and bounds. But, said Nancy, and she stopped there. She looked out a porthole at the rising sun. But what? The world is in the mess it's in today because of the nothing-headedness of olden times. Don't you see? She was pleading weakly. The world can't afford sex anymore. Of course it can afford sex, said Billy. All it can't afford anymore is reproduction. Then why the laws? They're bad laws, said Billy. If you go back through history, you'll find that the people who have been most eager to rule, to make the laws, to enforce the laws, and to tell everybody exactly how God Almighty wants things here on earth, those people have forgiven themselves and their friends for anything and everything, but they have been absolutely disgusted and terrified by the natural sexuality of common men and women. Why this is, I do not know. That is one of the many questions I wish somebody would ask the machines. I do know this. The triumph of that sort of disgust and terror is now complete. Almost every man and woman looks and feels like something the cat dragged in. The only sexual beauty that an ordinary human being can see today is in the woman who will kill him. Sex is death. There's a short and nasty equation for you. Sex is death, QED. So you see, Nancy, said Billy, I spent this night, and many others like it, attempting to restore a certain amount of innocent pleasure to the world, which is poorer in pleasures than it needs to be. Nancy sat down quietly and bowed her head. I'll tell you what my grandfather did on the dawn of his wedding night, said Billy. I don't think I want to hear it. It isn't violent. It's meant to be tender. Maybe that's why I don't want to hear it, she said. He read his bride a poem, Billy said. He took the book from the table and opened it. His diary tells which poem it was. While we aren't bride and groom, and while we may not meet again for many years, I'd like to read you this poem to have you know I've loved you. Please, no, I couldn't stand it. All right, I'll leave the book here, with the place marked in case you want to read it later. It's the poem beginning, How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feeling out of sight for the ends of being and ideal grace.